Hey there, I'm Lindsay Dreyer, host of the Joyfulpreneur podcast, where I share tips, tricks, and strategies to help women entrepreneurs maximize joy and freedom in their lives and businesses. Let's dive into today's episode. Today on the podcast, we have Emily Aborn, content copywriter, podcast host, and founder of She Built This. She is a community builder. She is an awesome all-around lady, and she also happens to be my neighbor in the town next door to me in New Hampshire. We are talking about 4 out-of-the-box ways to increase your visibility. Let's get to the episode. Emily, you have 4 out-of-the-box ways to increase visibility. What are those 4 ways?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I always like to say thank you. And we will just dive right in. So my 4 out-of-the-box ways, because I think that people often think that visibility is just like, hey, look at me, like here I am, I'm in business, are collaboration, connection, content, and cohesion. And I know they're all C words.
I love that.
That's to help it be memorable and easy for us.
So let's dive into the first one, which is collaboration.
So in my opinion, collaboration is 1 + 1 = something bigger than 1. So for example, what you and I are doing right now, Lindsay, is a collaboration, okay? We are showing up and sharing a platform together. We're bringing together our unique brains to create something bigger than ourselves. Like this is something that is going to live in the ether forever and ever and ever, and people can download it and it will ripple out to more people than just us. So 1 + 1 = something bigger than 1. It could look like a podcast interview. It could look like an event or a workshop that you're doing with somebody else. It could look like sharing a blog opportunity with someone. So like you're letting them in as a guest blogger or vice versa. Or it could look like doing a Facebook Live with somebody else. So it's really anytime you know what? It could also look like as a service provider. If you're a copywriter and you work with a website designer, that's a collaboration. Like that is a form of collaboration. And you can see how if you're thinking of marketing and visibility, that takes what you have and multiplies it more so. It takes what they have and it multiplies it more so. So it's really, like I said, like it's 1 + 1 = more than 1. And what the limit is on that more than 1 is, I would say, endless possibility depending on what you're collaborating in.
What's an example of a successful collaboration that you've had recently or in the recent past, and why do you define it as successful?
So I think I love being on podcast interviews. Like, I think that's a really good example of a successful collaboration. It almost is always successful. And what makes that successful, I'm going to give you 2 examples.
Please.
That way it helps open up people's perspectives. So what makes, I think, a podcast interview particularly successful is both people showing up prepared, both people showing up excited to both pull the knowledge out and also get the knowledge and have that conversation and create something bigger and valuable for the audience. I've also done, recently I did something called the Content Compass with my friend Karen Kenny. And it's a series of 4 workshops. And I think we have 9 people signed up, which is not like an exponential amount of people. Okay. It's like actually kind of a small group. And I was expecting it to be a little larger. And I think we both we'll welcome in 30, you know? But I want to say it has felt like a very successful collaboration because we came together with excitement. We respected each other. We trusted each other. It was like, it felt easy for both people. And I think that's a huge key too. Like I've held events that it's like, I feel like I'm doing all the work. Or as a podcast host, you feel like you're doing all the work. Your guest doesn't show up prepared. And so in this example, I think what made it a really big success is like just how committed we both were to showing up and doing our part and bringing like our own, everybody bringing 100% to the table, right, is what makes it a successful collaboration. And I think one way you can find out if somebody is going to be, it takes a little trial and error. I'm not going to lie. I've had some really rough collaboration. But one way I think that you can test out if something is going to be a good collaboration is to have an open conversation and really talk about like, this is my personality, this is my style. Sometimes it's like, sometimes I can come across a little bit like this, or sometimes I can be a little bit like overbearing or demanding, or like me, like I would be like, sometimes I can be a little bit passive. So if that's happening, you need to like snap me out of it. And like, I'm giving you permission to just have open, honest communication. So I think that's a really good way to like right out of the gate, like set the tone for the collaboration and not have any of that like awkwardness. Also delineating like who's doing what. So if there is some sort of like, well, this is a gray area where either of us could be doing it, or I would expect that person to do it, you have to talk about those things and be like, this is what you're doing. This is what I'm doing. Like, I'm taking care of the books and the finances. You're taking care of the social media posts. End of story. So that's in my mind. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it being a success. And sometimes it's literally just like the energy and the chemistry of the two people. Like sometimes you bring two great people together and it's just like not good chemistry. Sometimes you bring two not great people together, two people you wouldn't think would have good chemistry, and it goes amazing. So it's like that, it's a little trial and error and a lot of like knowing what you're getting into by having that open, honest communication.
I think we can all relate to the school project where you're on a team. And which role do you typically play? Are you the person who ends up doing everything because everyone else realizes you'll do everything and they can all just sit back and relax? So it really is, a collaboration is just a team thing. And so I love how you're talking about how you need to define the roles, because everyone needs to know what to expect. Like having those expectations set in advance and having deadlines, it's really just like a project plan. You need to make sure that there's a project plan for that collaboration.
It's 100% like a school project, which actually I didn't really enjoy. And I did end up doing, I did end up doing a lot of the work, but then I would like delegate at the end, right? So then I'm like, at the end, I'm like, okay, now you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. And I was not the perfectionist in the group. So like, if you want a perfect project, that is not me. But what you were saying about delineating is like also another thing to understand is this. Sometimes when you're collaborating with somebody else, you actually have to do more than you think you're going to. Like I would say a collaboration in almost all cases, you have to do more than you would if you're doing it alone. Like it's not as easy to do something by yourself as it is to collaborate with somebody else. But I think that's what can also make it really like if you're just genuinely excited to collaborate with that person, like that's the magic in it, So, and it is a win-win-win, right? It's a win for you, it's a win for them, and it's a win for the people that you're bringing the collaboration to.
Do you take into account the audience of your collaborators? So do you make sure that there's synergies, that you guys have overlap? Is that something you look for?
Yeah, so sometimes you might want overlap. Sometimes you might want to get in front of a different audience that you're not in front of at all, but it might be like a good opportunity for you. So I think that it's yes and.
Okay.
It's yes, I look for overlap, and also yes, sometimes I want to get out of my box and increase my visibility to get in front of new people.
So there is a lot of strategy involved in this collaboration. You have to consider the audiences, you have to consider the person you're collaborating with, what your goals are. I think so often I've seen collaborations where people just really like each other and they're like, let's just collab, let's do this. But I do think it's like everything in business where you need to make sure there's a plan behind it. There's like an intentional reason that you're collaborating. There's a lot to think about.
Yeah. I mean, it like, honestly, I've been collaborating for like, I think 8 or 9 years and I still don't have it down. So there is a lot to think about.
So many moving parts. Let's move on to number 2, connection. So tell me about using connection to increase your visibility.
So this really comes down to like instead of just saying, look at me, okay, I see a lot of content on social media where people are like promoting themselves, promoting their products or offerings. That's great. We need that. But at the same time, you also have to connect with the audience that you're trying to reach and like let them see themselves, show them themselves, and connect in like a really human way. And I would say human now more than ever. Like you have to show your humanity and your personality and connect with people. So the other way that connection looks, so that's one piece of it, is like, how am I actually showing up as myself? You know, like how am I connecting with other people and showing my audience also that I see them?
Mm-hmm.
But the other piece of it is like networking, right? Like getting out of our little rooms.
No.
Yes, and going to meet and connect with other people. Trust me, I'm like a homebody. I do not like to leave my house. And I think if you rethink connection or connecting or networking to relationship building, it makes it so much easier. Like, I'm like, okay, I'm not actually going to network. I'm going to build my relationships. And that could look different for you than like some huge networking event.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it might just look like going to get a cup of coffee with somebody or, I don't know, having lunch with someone. So this is a form of connection. Like being a podcast host is a fantastic way to connect with other people. You're like fast tracking the networking.
It's
like,
also so fun.
Yes, it's so fun.
I love it so much.
I totally agree. So when it comes to connecting with other people, I would ask someone to think about like what feels good to them. So some people love those big networking events. Some people love the BNI. Like some people are super, super into that. Right. And some people just want to stay home in their jammies and connect on Zoom. And I like truly do not think that there is anything wrong with that. Some people enjoy like a small group where they're showing up regularly and consistently meeting with the person. But it's really all about like relationship building. And that goes with the people in your networking sphere and also your clients.
One of my recommendations to people I'm coaching is if you can combine connection or networking or socialization or relationship building with hobbies and interests, things that you love to do, it's like double duty. Like you get to participate in something you're absolutely super into, but then you're also meeting new people or hanging out with people.
I started calling it net walking instead of networking because I will go and take like super long, like somehow I will end up taking like a 2-hour walk with somebody where we would have just met on Zoom for a half an hour and then been like, okay, bye. And it's so much better. Like we go so much deeper and the conversation is so much easier because you're not like facing each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree. Like get your body moving, get out there, have fun, do something in nature. Like there is no limit to how you can connect.
I love that. And I also want to just totally get rid of the word networking. I think it just makes everyone feel gross and salesy and disgusting. Okay. Increasing visibility. Number 3, we have content, which I know this is like your passion in life. You are the content queen. So let's get into it.
Okay, so you might think when it comes to visibility, content specifically, it is back to that promotional stuff, right? Like the selling, here I am, here's my products, here's my services. But I actually think that there's 3 other categories we need to include in our content as well. And that is personal. So like sharing some of the things that light you up in life. Like also, this does not mean you need to like take a hashtag vulnerable picture of yourself on the floor, like crying your eyes out and like sharing your most personal, deep, dark secrets. Like personal can mean whatever it wants to mean for you. It can mean that you have an obsession with Ticonderoga pencils or like whatever personal little touches about your life you want to share. That's personal content. I love sharing photos of my dog like that, or hiking in the woods or being with my family. Like that's really fun personal content for me to share. The third one is inspirational, and you're really good at this.
Thanks.
You're welcome. This is where you like take a quote or something that's inspiring you or something you know your ideal clients will be like motivated and inspired by. And you're just kind of like, this has no purpose, it has no ulterior motive. It's literally just like, go you, it's Wednesday. It can be rough, but we're going to do it.
Yeah.
You know?
Let's feel good, people. The world is really hard sometimes. Let's just make it good.
Exactly. And the other one is nurturing or educational content. So this is like where you show your expertise, where you might give people like a little tip or a how-to or something really tangible and practical. And I think like the other thing to consider in content is like you might have a email, you might have a podcast, you might have social media, you might have a blog, like your website. You might have all of this different content and it's all going to kind of fit into different categories, or you might use one for all 4 categories. So just to recap them again, because I know I don't want to get people confused. It's promotional, personal, educational, and inspirational or motivational. So those are the ways I recommend when we're thinking about content. Like, it's not all just the selling, marketing content. And I see people make this mistake all the time. Like, literally every time you show up, you're trying to sell me something. And it makes me never want to buy anything. But if you're like always there for your audience, like showing up in a way and like thinking about what you love to create, but also like what they're feeling on the other side, it comes from such a good place and you get like this really well-rounded content plan.
So those 4 categories, what's the balance of each of those that you recommend? Does it equal airtime? Is it one more than other? Do you have a strategy or recommendation?
When you're starting out, I would say just like make it 25% for each and every single one. When you decide, like I'm guilty of going way too much into the educational stuff. Like I will write like thousands and thousands of words of educational content or do podcasting on tons of educational content. So I have to be cognizant of that. But I think when you're starting out, a great rule of thumb is just like 25%, 25%, 25%. And if that means you break it down, like literally post, or email, that's hard. That's a tongue twister. Then start there.
I agree with you. And I think that people like interacting with people who are well-rounded and making sure that you have equal airtime or you're not just selling. It makes you a human, and people want to interact with humans online. They don't want to interact with sales bots.
Like, let me ask you how many times you listen to like a podcast like Smart List and you're like, fast forward the Bombas ad,
100%,
right?
always.
Or the mattress ad. You're like, no, just get me back to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm here for the meat and potatoes. That's what I want.
Exactly.
So since we're in content, let's take a little dive into repurposing content. I love that you talk about this a lot. And so what are some tips you have for repurposing content, and like what's the first piece of content you recommend people create? Is it a blog post? Is it a social post? Does it matter? And then where do they go from there?
This is like my favorite topic. I got to roll out my soapbox.
Okay, good. I'm so glad. I want you to get into it because you have some good stuff when it comes to repurposing content.
So the first thing I love to remind people of is that repurposing is amazing for helping your message go further, faster, wider. Meaning, not everyone sees everything the first time, for sure. Like the Instagram and Facebook algorithm, no offense to any of us, they do not like us. Like
no, they don't.
They're not our friends.
Oh.
So putting it in front of people multiple times, like you can't really go wrong. I mean, I wouldn't recommend saying like the exact same thing every single day, but saying it in different ways and showing up in different places, I think is really valuable. Repurposing is not, the other thing is sometimes when someone sees something, it like doesn't land for them,
right.
But maybe it lands for them when they hear it. So, and I'll give you a good example of somebody that I know you know. Lindsay Masterson was on my email list, and she said to me, well, I don't read your emails because A, they're too long, and B, I can't like follow the content that way, the way that you map it out.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what, Lindsay Masterson, I'm going to read you my emails from now on. So from now on, I put my microphone in every single week and I record myself reading my email, and I get so much great feedback on how people love that. At the base of it, that is just like an example of repurposing the content, because like I already created the content and now I'm just doing it in another way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, so that's a basic repurposing. Most of the time, repurposing isn't just cut and paste. It's not just like taking the exact same thing and putting it someplace else, because thinking about your email, what if I tell a story in my email and it like makes sense for the call to action at the end of the email, but like it's long, right? And then I like go try to put that on Facebook and it like, or I'm going to use Instagram because they have like a character count. And it's like, no, you can't post it that long. So I can't just like put half the story, copy and paste it and be like, read the rest in my email. Like people are like, I'm not reading the rest in your email.
Get lost.
Yeah. So sometimes we have to modify it a little bit, like shorten the story, you know, or not include the story and maybe just include the takeaway or the tips or guide people just to what we were guiding them to. So you have to kind of think of it like that. Like when I'm sitting down to repurpose something, does this translate to the platform I'm turning it over to? A blog, if you just like sat there and like I think a blog makes a great podcast and I think a podcast makes a great blog. So vice versa. But if you just sit there and like read your blog, it might not be like the best podcast ever. And if I just took my transcript from my podcast and like uploaded it as my blog, it would sound a whole lot like,
right.
You know, people are like, who wrote this? So you have to put things into context and you have to take it takes a little finessing. That said, at the end of the day, it's a huge time saver because you can start with one pillar piece of content and work your way into all those other places you want to share. I think a podcast, a blog, and honestly, even your website copy is loaded with stuff for you to repurpose. Like you spent all this time writing your beautiful website copy, right? Like taking all the time and like coming up with these taglines. And then like people aren't sitting there reading every word on your website. Not. Yeah. So take it, repurpose it into social media posts, repurpose it into a whole podcast about like why somebody should hire you or what services you offer, transformation you brought someone. So, or your like tips, you know? So that's something else to consider. But I got on a tangent, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Oh, yes. So starting with that big, like I do say, like if you're just getting started with repurposing, it's so easy to start with something big and break it down into something small. But it doesn't really need to be that way. You could reverse engineer it. So like say you are always sharing tips on Instagram and you realize like, oh, these ones all kind of had the same theme. Like I was constantly sharing tips about self-care. Then you could turn that into like my 10 top tips for self-care or my 10 top tips for being more joyful in your business. So that's a good example of how you could actually reverse engineer. Like, I don't really think there's any limit to repurposing. I think that if you're speaking on stages, you can take that and repurpose it. I think that a podcast interview, like any question you ask me that gives me like a good feeling in my body, then I'm like, ooh, I have to talk about that, or I have to get my soapbox out about that. Like that's a repurposable moment. Your conversations on Boxer with your friends, when something just fires you up and you're like, I have to vent about this, repurposable moment, you know? So it's like all those little things, like that when you want to step in and coach somebody and tell them like what they need to be fixing or doing, and you're like, I do not have permission to coach. I do not have permission to coach. That's a repurposable moment. So it's much bigger, I think, than we think it is. And that's why I get so excited about it.
No, I love it because it's just taking things that we're doing anyway and fleshing them out. So I can imagine it's just saving so much time and energy, but also I like how you're talking about how it just feels really good in your body and like you get really jazzed about it, because we've all felt that when someone asks us about something and we just go into the total utter joy flow state where we're like word vomit, but it's really awesome word vomit. Like it's so good. And so, yeah, I love that. Pay attention to that stuff.
Yes. And like, that's the stuff other people want to hear too, you know? So, and you know, I try to not make things too ranty. Like sometimes I will go on a little bit of a rant. Like my dad and I were having a conversation about ChatGPT over the weekend. And I was like, and I'm about to go on a rant. So I try to not make things too ranty on my, you know, when I repurpose things, but come at it from a like helpful perspective.
Yeah. Actually, I'm so glad you brought up ChatGPT because that was my next question. Do you use AI in the respects where you could throw your blog post into ChatGPT and say, create an Instagram post for me or create a Facebook post for me from this content?
I just did a podcast episode recently on my She Built This podcast, and it came out today with Erin Alila, a fellow copywriter, where we were talking about AI. So I do use AI for helping me with ideation and outlines. I do not, and you actually cannot copy and paste anything that tool gives you and call it your own. Like
Right.
It's not yours. Secondly, personally, I find it kind of takes a little bit away. Like it is, I have a very distinct personality. Like people can almost always tell when I wrote something, and I know my audience enough to know that would not fly for them. If you want to get started by putting something into ChatGPT, like a blog, and saying, what are 5 posts you would pull from this? Sure, do that. But then make them you, right? Humanize them. Like you actually have to rework that content and copy. I heard one time really recently that somebody said, oh, I just use ChatGPT to create my social media content. And in my heart, I was like, no.
Please don't. Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have some pretty like creatively strong thoughts about it where I just think it's like kind of a slight to creativity. But I think that as an ideation tool, especially for a DIYer, it's okay to start there. You absolutely have to humanize it.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's amazing for first drafts, ideation, list making, taking a piece of your content and maybe like creating some things out of that. But ultimately, going back to connection, like it's you they're connecting with. They're not connecting with ChatGPT. So you need to make sure that it's your voice, it's your ideas, it makes sense. Like they're words that would actually come out of your mouth, or else your audience is going to think you're a robot.
You also need to fact check it. Like,
oh, totally.
Imagine it's like telling you incorrect information. You're putting that incorrect information out. You're claiming that you're like an expert in this area. And people are like, well, that's just wrong. So now they don't trust you as the expert.
Yeah.
So I think it's really it's like go back to school and use our critical thinking muscles and use it with your critical thinking.
Yes, we can't just leave the critical thinking to the machines. It is not going to happen. Not yet, anyway. Right. So one of the things I've heard you talk about is having themes for your months on the content you're going to create. So I want to hear more about the themes. I think this is such a cool idea.
You're such a good listener. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this kind of goes into my 4th out of the box visibility thing too. So we'll just weave it all together.
Let's do it.
And it's like a very meta thing because it's the 4th out of the box way to increase your visibility is cohesion. And we are like bringing these together, which is cohesion. So, okay, so I do theme my months, and I will use anything from like a really big theme like communication to something really, really tiny and specific like the Taylor Swift song, It's Me, Hi, I'm the Problem, It's Me. That was literally the theme of one of my months.
That was my favorite month, by the way. It was so good.
So that was all about like accountability and responsibility, right? So when I theme my months, I do it for 2 reasons. I do it to help myself stay on track with my content because I bring on a lot of podcast guests, I write a lot of blogs, and I like to have I like to be consistent about what I'm talking about throughout the month and just like really keep things on track. I know myself and I could go in like 60,000 different directions just because I'm like curious about so many things and I love to share about all kinds of things and topics. So instead of going a mile wide, I like to go a mile deep.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I do themes. So that theme will translate to everything that I'm doing throughout the month, whether it be my podcast, whether it be a workshop that I'm bringing, like whether it be my Instagram, my emails, it all goes together. And the other reason I do the theme is so that my audience, like they don't even know, I don't think that this is happening. Sometimes it's very, very subtle, but it gives people like this sense of cohesion throughout your content. And you're like I love to help people think of it like you're taking them on a journey.
Yeah.
Right? And you're helping open their minds up to this topic in so many different angles and so many different perspectives. And I'll give you a really good story, which I just think goes to the power of theming your months. Last month, my own content theme, like for my content writing business, was repurposing. And I was like, how am I going to talk about repurposing for a whole month? I have never, ever in my entire life had a more prolific month. I must have written 7 blogs about repurposing. Now I'm doing this for a project, like for an SEO project for myself. 7 blogs about repurposing, podcasts about repurposing. I did a workshop on repurposing. I did emails on repurposing. Like it just exploded. And I was like, this is the power, because if you know your stuff and you can like speak to any one topic in your business from all these different angles, it is so powerful for you and your people.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to brains and how they work. And so we all have this thing called the reticular activation system. And so the best way you can describe it is if you're shopping for a car, and I love Mini Coopers. So I know I'm buying a Mini Cooper, and after I decide I love Mini Coopers and I'm buying one, I see them everywhere. Like this happens all the time. And so people think it's like this magic thing that, oh, your brain just like, there's more Mini Coopers now, but there's actually not. And so I love the idea of your themes because it plays into this where you have told your brain that this particular thing is important to you this month. And so it notices more opportunities, it notices more people, more ideas, more everything. And so it's all those gifts from the universe aren't really magical things. It's just your brain knowing that this is super important to you right now. And so I think it really takes advantage of that. And I love the idea of having a theme month because of that, because it really does like open up those synchronicities and more opportunities for prolific content.
You made another good point there, because like now so let's just imagine I'm talking about communication all month, right? And someone sees something out in the world that reminds them of what I'm talking about. Like I am making myself top of mind by repeating the same message over and over and over again. So, and again, like going back to the thing I said before, like I'm not talking about saying the exact same thing all the time. I'm just talking about being repetitive and consistent in what you're sharing on.
Yes. And you never know when that message is going to land with somebody and their reticular activation system is activated by that piece of content. So when you're repeating yourself, it feels like you're repeating yourself, but they aren't seeing every single thing you're putting out there due to algorithms, due to they are busy with their lives, due to whatever. So I think that this is just more proof that repeating yourself actually isn't a bad thing. It's just you're giving people more opportunities for it to land with their brain.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so let's sum up. We have our 4 out-of-the-box ways to increase visibility. We have collaboration, connection, content, which, oh my gosh, we really dived into. I really like that one a lot. And cohesion. So my last question for you is, what is your key to joyful entrepreneurship?
Okay, I'm going to tell you one that I've been working on. Ooh. And recently I think it's really stuck. And that is to not overbook my schedule, because I love to be able to take time in the afternoon and go swimming in the lake or go for a hike. Or I love when somebody says, "Are you free this afternoon?" And I can say yes. So I love that. I love that feeling. I love the feeling of not having to move everything around that I've already jam-packed in. It's so much less stressful. So that's my answer. It's been something I've been working on really, really consistently, and it makes me feel so much happier when my schedule is like freer.
Yeah, you have space to just let things happen. It's hard though. It is a practice for sure. And we get off we'll fall off the wagon and then we have to get back on it.
Totally.
So if people want to connect with you and find you, you have amazing content. So where can they find all of your wonderful stuff?
Thank you. I think the easiest spot to find me is emilyaborn.com. And then it's the same thing on Instagram, Emily Aborn. And it's acorn with a B.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was a great crash course in how you can increase your visibility. And we also got your mini lesson in content, which I'm so glad we got into.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for having me.
Before I let you go, I wanted to let you know that I have a 5-day Spark Joy Challenge, and it is totally free, available on my website. You can go to joyfulpreneur.link/podcast. The link is also in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to the Joyfulpreneur podcast. Remember to check the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in this episode. Your reviews also mean the world to me. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Until next time, stay joyful.